pay taxes on. Or his value was less because he just grew to an old age and wasn't as strong of a worker as he once was when she first received him. We learn even more information about Cambridge from Sarah Gould's will. Sarah's will was made in 1763 but wasn't submitted to the courts until 1788. This meant that Cambridge was in the Gould family for at least 32 years. In Sarah's will, there is nothing that was stated to be given to Cambridge once she dies. Although I don't think this is right, it doesn't surprise me. In another document, we read about Sarah Gould's estate. This document goes further into the kind of work Cambridge did and what he received for it. On the first page of this document, we see that Sarah Gould purchased a jacket to be made for Cambridge that just cost about £6. We learn that he often cut and loaded wood for Sarah. Since Cambridge had been doing hard labor during many hours of the day, his shoes had to be mended about 9 different times over the span of about 12 years. It was clear that during Cambridge's time with Sarah and previous slave owners that he had worked hard around the clock. Although we do have some information on Cambridge, it's not nearly enough to get a true understanding of who he was. We don't know anything about his birth family, if he had siblings, where he was born, his personal relationships, and if he had kids, and most importantly, his point of view on the situations he was put in over the course of his life. The lack of specific information on enslaved people is mainly due to the fact that slave owners thought of their enslaved people as less than nothing, so they didn't bother including any aspects of their personal lives in records. Enslaved people were denied basic human rights, including the fact that they weren't allowed to read or write. This meant that most of them weren't able to write their own stories and experiences on these documents. Also, another reason is that many records that may have existed could have been lost or destroyed. This is an unfortunate part of history because it means that personal stories, experiences, and valuable cultural information have been lost, as generations like today can't further their learning from them. In conclusion, from the information I had been given, I concluded that Cambridge worked very hard despite the circumstances of being enslaved. He appeared to be a valuable asset to the families that enslaved him. His story inspires me to learn from the past and shows generations to not repeat the same mistakes.
Thank you, Juliana. Next, we will hear from representatives from the 3 churches who have come together to make this a partnership between several denominations. So up next, we have from the Trinity Episcopal Church, Reverend Blake.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be a part of this this day and the story of Cambridge Gould and the Witnessstone Project and all the wonderful things that are happening as a result of this. I just want to recount a story that is told in my tradition. It happens in a place of worship like this, in a place called Capernaum, and the person who stands up and reads and then interprets the scripture is Jesus. But he isn't expected to do that. He's sort of a simple person in everybody's eyes from a backwater town, a place called Nazareth. And yet he stands up and he reads from the scroll and interprets it. And people are amazed at the fact that he does this and that he speaks with authority. Now, I heard that story a lot of times, but one of the most powerful interpretations of the story was from someone who was sort of interpreting through the lens of the civil rights movement. And he helped me to sort of see it in a different way. Students of the civil rights movement will know that the people who spoke with power were people like Governor George Wallace or Bull Connor. But then there were also those who spoke with authority. People like Rosa Parks, who who one day on the bus in Montgomery refused to go to the back of the bus. And she made a profound difference, and in her way, and in that action and many others, she spoke with authority. There were those who spoke with power, but she spoke with authority. And I think that's sort of what we are doing here today, or when we're doing here any time that we lay a new witness stone, that we're remembering people who may not have had power, but who have tremendous authority of such that people of their time, they themselves had no clue that we would be telling their stories so many centuries later. But their stories are stories that are life-changing, that change our perspective, that open our eyes to see the world in a new way. And so in our own sense, like those of the past, they are speaking as people with authority. Their voice lingers on. Their voice has authority. Their voice opens our eyes to see the world in a different way. So I think that's the power of this project. Jesus was someone, as I said, who lived in a place that was sort of backwater by all the standards of the day. And the area was occupied by the Roman Empire, and not far from where Jesus grew up and lived, they built this city on the Mediterranean called Caesarea Maritima. It was a place of trade, but it was a place where they erected all these great, grand stone buildings in the Greco-Roman style. They were magnificent statements from people who had power, and the people that they got to build these were people like probably maybe including Jesus. Jesus often is translated as being a carpenter, his family a carpenter, but scholars tell us actually it's closer to a stonemason. So it's possible that Jesus could have been one of the people who helped construct some of these grand buildings in this nearby city that sort of reflected the prestige and power of the Roman Empire. Jesus wasn't one in that regard that anybody expected to be remembered. Jesus was, or whoever helped to lay these stones of these grand buildings, these symbols of power. And yet, all these many years later, we have the ruins of those buildings, but we have the voice of the one who spoke with authority in the eyes of many. So each time that a witness stone is laid, I think it's important to think of it as a revelation, of a hearing of someone's voice, someone who nobody expected to be heard, but whose story is becoming part of our story and shaping the way that we look at the world and the way that we understand what it means to live in this world, to offer our gifts in simple ways, not realizing the difference that we may be making in other people's lives and the way that we may be shaping the world beyond our imagination. So I offer that today, and thank you all for being a part of this project.
Next, from the New Antioch Church of God, we have Reverend Esau Green.
Good morning, everyone. Before I say too much, first I want to applaud all the students who took part in this great and memorable project. Give yourselves a big round of applause. To my colleagues and First Selectman and Representative Comey, it's an honor to be here. As I was driving down this morning I live in Essex, Connecticut, and many thoughts started going through my mind. I am only a third generation removed from slavery. My great-grandmother was captured in Ghana and brought to America. So we still feel and see the effects of slavery today. And I'm only 57 years old. That's real old to some of you guys, but not that old to many. But as I was thinking and pondering what I would say, Cambridge Gould was the name that was given by his enslavers. And as we commemorate and celebrate Cambridge Gould, we have to remember that this was a man who endured heartache, disappointment, the ambiguity of not knowing truly his own name. And as we lay that stone today, as we celebrate his life and think about his legacy, the thought that comes to my mind was, did he truly know who he was? But he kept on fighting for dignity, no doubt for love, no doubt for acceptance. And even as the rector was speaking about Jesus Christ and being a master carpenter, and the mention of Cambridge working with wood, I wonder, and the thought that's provoked is, as he was chopping wood and laying it up, what were his thoughts? What were the thoughts that many of us have as we get older? And maybe some of you are too young to quite understand this, but as we get older, we always want to think about our own legacy and what we leave behind. But I believe today that Cambridge left something more than what he gave, and that you young people have picked it up and recognized that no matter your color or creed, humanity should always be celebrated. So I celebrate you, and thank you all for the opportunity.
From our host site today, Reverend Joe Perdue of the First Congregational Church.
Most scientists think that we developed written language around 3200 BCE, and our ancestors evolved the ability to speak around 20 million years ago. And for much of that period, we have been telling stories. The first stories we have recorded are simple cave paintings in places like France and ancient parchment scrolls with poems that are thousands of years old, and over the centuries that has evolved into literature and opera and even social media. But what that tells us is that as a species, we have an innate drive to recount narratives about who we are. Sometimes our mythology contains truths that are more profound than anything that can be measured empirically. Our ancestors that told stories are the ones who lived long enough to reproduce. Because when someone said, "Are those berries safe to eat or not?" they could argue, "Well, Grandpa said the red berries are safe." No, he said they're not safe. And they could forget. But nobody forgot the story that Grandpa told about what happened to the kid who ate the red berries. It's how we remember things about ourselves. We tell stories because we're human, and we are made more human by the stories that we tell. Telling stories taps into an ancient power that makes us and the world more of who we are. And how we begin our stories is important. It sets the tone for the narrative. It sets the tone for who we are as a people. But if we're not careful, it can define us. Because for all the importance we give to the opening of a story, sometimes it falls very short of how we want the narrative to go. Take Branford. The people who founded Branford and the rest of the New Haven area were not exactly role models. Half of them came from Wethersfield, and they were strongly encouraged to leave because their arguments had gotten so far out of hand that basically exiling them was the only way to avoid violence in the community. And the rest moved to New Haven because they thought that all the other Puritans in Massachusetts had become a bunch of soft liberals. They had the audacity to allow people to vote without the express approval of the religious fundamentalists in their town. Of course, you still had to be a reasonably rich white man to vote, but you no longer had to pretend to be just as devout as the worst person you knew. And that was too far for the radicals among them. So they sailed to New Haven in order to found a newer, better theocracy than the one that degenerated up north. And then, when the New Haven colony was forced to merge with the Connecticut colony, a place that also allowed rich white men to vote without the approval of fundamentalist clergy, about half the population of Branford decided they couldn't handle all that liberalism, and they sailed away to found a newer, better theocracy again. They ended up in Newark, New Jersey, which is no more than they deserved. The people who founded our town were not role models for all of those reasons, but also because they were slavers. They came to Branford in order to celebrate a religion that is supposed to be about freedom and equality and justice, and they were unable to see the disconnect between the ideals of Christianity and owning other people. They ignored the countless poetry, prophecy, and proclamation throughout the Old and the New Testament that made slavery impossible if it was taken seriously. They were hypocrites, but so are we. We're all guilty of cognitive dissonance. We can't just defend them by saying they were the products of their time, because lots of people in their time thought slavery was reprehensible and wanted to end it. Branford had a bad beginning. That is not the tone we want for our story, but that is not how the story ended, because by the 1700s, the late 1700s, within several generations, the hypocrisy became too much. Children were told, just read the Bible, and they did, and they took it seriously in a way that scandalized their elders, and they started to become more and more opposed to slavery, until a time came before slavery was criminalized in New England that clergy in congregational churches would no longer tolerate people owning slaves in their communities. And the histories of towns like Guilford, Branford, and North Branford tell stories of clergy literally harassing people until they freed their slaves or left town. Because we decided that we were not going to tell the story of slavers anymore. And over time, that opposition to slavery grew. There are places close to us that were stops on the Underground Railroad. Many of them were in churches. If they were not in churches, they were in the homes of people who attended those churches. There is a rumor in this church that has been passed down for centuries. Some of the oldest people in this congregation, I remember their grandparents telling them the story of how enslaved people hid in what is now our basement on their way to freedom in Canada. The descendants of slavers helped to rescue slaves. The story got better. It got better and better over time. When the Amistad came to New England, it was the Congregational churches who decided that they were going to oppose the will of the President of the United States and the Spanish Empire by defending them, by raising money to house them and pay their legal fees, and force what would become known as the very first civil rights case in the United States, where it was decided that the people who took the Amistad were not slaves and property of the Empire of Spain, but they were free people who had been illegally kidnapped, and they were able to return home. This was due to the efforts of descendants of slavers because they refused to allow the beginning of the story to be its end. And over time, the story continues to get better. Those churches became part of a movement that issued the first anti-slavery pamphlet in American history, that engaged in the first act of civil disobedience, the first church to ordain women since the time of the New Testament, the first church to ordain African American clergy, the first church to ordain openly gay ministers, and to affirm abortion as health care, which is a human right. This church has become more and more active in civil rights as a denomination and as a local congregation. We are committed to being an anti-racist church. And it's easy for us to pat ourselves on the back and say, we're doing great. Look at all of these great things we've done. We've come so far since the beginning of our story. We are nothing like the Puritans and the slavers from whom we are descended. It's easy to forget our sins and to rest on our laurels and get lazy and allow injustice to fester around us. But it is precisely because of people like Cambridge that we have to keep moving forward to a world that is more just. We have a debt to the past and a duty to the future. Whenever we study history, we like to pretend that we would have done things differently than our ancestors. If I had been alive during the Holocaust, I would have put a secret room in my house to hide Jews. If I had been alive in the 19th century, surely I would have been an abolitionist. I would have signed up with the Union Army and been a stop on the Underground Railroad. If I had been alive in the 60s, I would have taken a bus to Selma and marched with Dr. King. We like to pretend that we would have been the heroes in the story. But you know what? There are civil rights issues happening right now, today, all over our country. And what we're doing now is what we would have done then. Our actions reveal whether we would be the heroes or the villains in the stories that we like to tell ourselves. There are civil rights and social justice issues that are happening today in our country, from attacks on people for simply claiming that Black Lives Matter, to the hysteria around critical race theory from people who couldn't define it if you asked them, to attacks on the gay and trans siblings in our midst, to college students being brutalized and arrested for having the audacity to say maybe we shouldn't support genocide in Gaza. These are all the justice issues of our time. And if we want to honor Cambridge, if we really want to honor him and all of those like him whose names we will never know, this is a really good start. But laying the stone has to be the foundation of a movement of justice. Otherwise, it's just performative. And that is worse than ignoring him. So as we tell our stories, I encourage all of you to take the initiative to be the hero in the story. Be the person that you hope you would have been had you been alive during Cambridge's life.
We're going to deviate from the program a bit. Before we head outside, which we will do in just a few moments, I'm going to ask First Selectman Jamie Cosgrove to close out our indoor program inside here on the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here today and part of this ceremony. At the beginning of this ceremony, Mr. Carlson recognized the teachers and for bringing this project forward, and this was varying outside of the curriculum. And I understand that varying outside the curriculum can also create a little bit of challenges in kind of meeting what you need to do within the classroom. But I would like to just say I believe it's projects like this that really have the real true everlasting impact on the students. You heard it in the remarks. It really resonated with many students, and I believe strongly that they'll carry this lesson that they learned forward in their lives. And so I thank the staff, BHS, for bringing this forward, and certainly the Witness Stone Project. This placing the stone, which we will do shortly right out front, really brings it closer to home. It brings it closer. When you bring something closer to home, I feel that it raises the level of empathy that one has. And with empathy comes understanding. And through that understanding, we truly will create a better society. Understanding, we should not shy away from the past. We should understand, we should learn, and how do we make our lives and the lives of others better? And we do that through understanding and through empathy. So thank you to the students and the staff and the teachers and the Witness Stone Project for really bringing that forward, because I feel that's what really the underlying thing for this project is really empathy. And in closing, I just want to thank First Congregational, New Antioch, Trinity, Tabor, all the churches that are involved and joined together, the Witness Stone Project, the Branford Historical Society, the Branford Community Foundation, and last but certainly not least, all of the students that are in this room today. It is for your work that we would create an informed and compassionate community. So on behalf of the town of Branford, thank you.
So now Reverend Perdue will lead us outside. I ask if teachers can help students move outside to the front of the church. Thank you.